Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee. We have apologies from the Chair, Councillor Daly. So to start the meeting, we need to appoint a chair for the evening. Do we have any nominations for chair for tonight's meeting?
Yes, I would like to nominate Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor James. Are there any other nominations?
I'm going to nominate myself, but it would appear I would be outvoted.
If there are no other nominations, then Councillor Taylor will be appointed chair for tonight's meeting, and you can proceed with the agenda. Thank you.
That will be noted, and our apologies. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Sally Taylor, and I'm happy to chair tonight's meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping points. By attending and participating at this meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. Please can officers and guests introduce themselves when they first address the committee. If the fire alarm sounds, either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff fire exit, which is behind me to my right. Security officers will direct you to the assembly point in Riverside Gardens. So apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Jacqueline Daly, the chair, and Councillor Asif Sadiq. Are there any other apologies? Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, so that brings us on to the last meeting's minutes. Do members agree that the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of April 2025 are an accurate record of the meeting? So
I'm afraid I wasn't present, so I'm not in a position to agree.
I was present, and I have no comments to make there. Councillor Alford. Alford, sorry.
No, at the moment I don't.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to change the order of the agenda and take item 5, housing repairs update, before item 4. So we can move now on to the presentation for housing repairs service update. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm John Hayden, the Assistant Director of Repairs and Asset Strategy. So thank you for having me this evening. I will, are we sharing on the screen? So just, do you want to go? Okay, so over the past 12 months, I think it's safe to say that our WIP and our work numbers have reduced. We've now stabilized this service. We're running at 2,000 repairs circa a month, where 91% of all our jobs are now on target, which has been a massive effort because of the staff and the team and the operatives. We've got good performances from our DLO, who have been managing communal repairs and looking after sheltered scheme and independent living, and those numbers are running at 97 and 98% in target, which has been reflected back from the sheltered scheme forum and managers. We have a particularly strong damp and mold management in line with AWEB's law, which I'll come on to in a minute, which comes into effect from October. We've been operating in the last 15 months in that framework, and we're really strong where we've got 24 hours, we go to a home, 7 days we do the repairs, and we have a 6-week and a 6-month check-in. So that's been a really strong service over the last 15 months. And when we move into October, we've already started to report the KPIs that are nationally required in advance of the law coming into fruition. So we're really happy with that at the moment. Voids management, we've got 626 voids which have been returned to the stock, and our voids are running at 88% in key. Disrepair has come right down. We've only had 1 disrepair claim in the last 7 months. We implemented a new policy pushing people through the legal or the complaints process. Maintenance and PPMs have been introduced in the last 12 months, where we've reduced 30% of repair demand just from doing proactive maintenance across the borough. New services, estate action days, drop-ins, just engaging with the customers has been particularly strong, and we're working on our new procurements for 2027 when our temp contracts come up. So we're going to have extra time to engage with members, with residents in advance of it, and we've got a couple of years head start, so we're working well there. On to the next slide, we've got just our performance figures. So you can see where we were in April 2023, where we were running at 5,000 jobs circa a month, back down to 2,500 in April 3,000 in April 24, and 2,000 in April 25. So the service has settled. The repair demand has settled. It's coming down, it's reduced. It's a more manageable number. Engagement's really good. You can see overdue jobs have reduced from 4,000 to 3, which has been a massive effort in terms of the team over 12 weeks. Damp and mold cases have come down from 916 to 281, and those are all live. We only have 7 on accesses, which we're working with the residents and the legal team to do. And at the bottom, you can see the performance of the service, which is the measurement metric, where we've gone from 87% of jobs in target for emergencies to 95.5%. And routine repairs, we're at 55 and are now 85.5. So we're our upper quartile London right now in terms of numbers against the other 32 councils. If I look at the TSM data, which is the data which comes in from our residents, in terms of the management figures, which I just gave you, they are tracking through. So where we are running at 95% in terms of emergency repairs and people satisfaction, we've gone from 49 to 62% with the service. The TSMs are coming with them. All our TSMs are up circa 25 to 30% on the previous year from residents' perception of the service rather than the actual measurement of service. And this has been publicised on the national database, because we have to push these out. These are verified by third parties. So it's really good. Some really strong ones in there that I'm particularly proud of as a service is the respectful in the home, 84% from 66% last year. So that's really good, where people feel that we're respectful of them, looking after their properties, we're listening to them, taking on board their homes and their ways of living, which is really, really strong there. Satisfied with repairs and respondents, we're up to 74%. So there's some really good numbers, which gives us the indication that the perception of the service is landing and it's following the management numbers. So it's really good to push through. If I can jump on to the next slide, please. So we've had this was always the council's focus when I arrived, was de-risking hazards in homes and risks. And we have a dedicated team that just works on damp and mold. And as I said, 95% of all our jobs are in target. Standalone policies, we've got damp and mold leaflets. We put sensors into homes, which is really good. So we get repeat issues, we're monitoring it actively and trying to go back to the home rather than them having to report it. And that's seen a really good bounce of satisfaction through with those residents there. We got external contractors who are dedicated just to this. So they're not the weights and measures. We got Effectables who focus on our damp and mold cases. We also got a DLO, which looks after the 24-hour emergency ones. And we obviously continuing to inspect, we're doing audits through our visits to homes. If we get a tenancy audit, we do a damp and mold check. If we do a home visit, we have a damp and mold check. So all the officers in housing, regardless of if they're in repairs or not, are walking into homes, and we're making sure that our homes are hazard free when we leave, and if not, they're reported. I mean, these are our measurements. So we have gone ahead of the legal requirements, and we now report these as of the 1st of April. It's a national legal requirement from the 1st of October. But as we've been operating in this framework for the last 14, 15 months, we're going to report it now. So these are the targets that are set by OWIP's law, and these are the ones that will be nationally measured on moving forward in October. And as I said, at the moment now, we are above these figures, and we have been for at least 12 to 14 months. So it's really strong performance from the DLO team and damp and mold and our officers. Again, this is just different things we introduced and we have done. So we check in after 6 weeks of treating a home. We actively call the home back, make sure we placate and manage the issue. We check back in again 6 months later. So we make sure we phone both those residents at those times, because some of the issues do repeat. Sometimes you have, living issues which just needed some support. Sometimes it's building fabric issues we need to follow up on. So we check back in on those homes. All our homes have a HHSRS, which is a housing risk assessment carried out for damp and mold. We get a lot of referrals through from working with our NHS partners, which we do around Hammersmith and Fulham. So people refer anything in from children with vulnerability, anything to do with respiratory issues, we deal with that straight away. And we also make sure that we assess the property and they can stay there. If they can't, we decant them. We move them out immediately and we resolve the issues and we move them back home. So there's been some really strong work that predated my arrival in Hammersmith and Fulham, working with NHS and working with different groups here. We've got a monthly meeting which all members of the council or officers from the council attend, just to discuss cases, look at referrals, and you can see the trend from where we are to where we ran down. So it's been really strong. It is a really strong part of what we deliver. Again, void management. I know empty properties is on everybody's agenda, so we want to get homes back in as quick as we can, decent homes. So when we get an empty property now, we do the full survey. You can see the trend from where it was 2 years ago to it is now. Nationally, we run in what we call a key, which is a time. So minor voids are 38 days, major voids are 60 days. So at the moment, 88% of our voids are being returned back to the stock within that national key. So the target's 85, our stretch is up to 92. And that continues to perform really well at the moment. The target would be to have less than 1% of our stock as void. And we do get churn and we do get work, but it's working well. Again, this repair process, we introduced this in January, and this has massively changed the risks to our residents who are getting, you've got these door knocking, ambulance chasing solicitors. So we have now agreed a legal process by adopting the Ombudsman's approach to mediation, which is in the disrepair protocols, which we went to court, we'd have to do. So we've introduced this in January. We've been able to take this number right down now. So we don't have people trapped with solicitors refusing to let us into homes, putting our properties at risk, putting residents at risk. We've done an awful lot of work in this. And as it stands now, we've got 61 damp and mold disrepair cases in borough, which is unheard of in terms of, looking at our neighbouring colleagues. So it's been a hard piece of work. I know Councillor Uwe particularly has been pushing with it, and the CEO have been pushing with this to make sure that we support residents and they don't get trapped. And this has been a real strong point for us in the last, 7 months. So, and the last slide is just really to update on our planned works and what we're doing. So we proactively now bringing the service out. We have done planned and proactive works for 14% of our stock in the last 12 months, which is 2,200 homes, doing drainage, doing guttering clearances, looking at repeat repair issues, trying to placate that. We've reduced 38% of work orders from doing proactive repairs in terms of drainage and blockages and issues. We have a way to go. We're going around the borough, but there's some really good stuff there. We do CCTV camera survey checks. We're checking the infrastructure of our buildings. If anything needs to be replaced or repaired, we're doing it as part of that work. And we do post inspections with our residents. We've done 291 where we walked on estates, looked at different buildings with our homes. Moving forward, we've got 44 estates earmarked. We've completed 44 estates. We're working through the borough. We've done all the sheltered schemes, but 5, which we're working on now. We will make sure we do tower blocks 14 and above for September. And then we're looking at different things. We can do smart collections on estates. We're looking to do some pop-up oil collections and just different things that residents have been asking for as part of our works. And in the past 6 months, we've saved spending of £52,000 based on previous years, just from drainage and PPM works and that. So it's been a really positive year for us in terms of engagement with residents and just supporting vulnerabilities in the home. And we're pretty happy at the moment.
Thank you very much, John. That's really very encouraging. So I'd like to ask if the panel have got any questions.
Yes, I've got quite a few.
Councillor Alford, you may.
First of all, why was I not presented with a PowerPoint? You've done a PowerPoint, there are figures on it. I don't seem to have got it in my papers. I'm not a telepath to go and... You've just done a PowerPoint.
Councillor Alford, that's down to the reason why we utilised the PowerPoints was to ensure that we can showcase what we've got. We've done PowerPoints in the past for these meetings. So
Also said I like to have hard copies and...
Chair, if I may, as with any other policy and accountability committee, reports are submitted in advance, so you have the data contained within the reports, and at every meeting in its own way, then there is also a presentation that's supplied, and this is the opportunity to ask questions on the report and that content.
On that PowerPoint, there were some figures. I can't retain them if I'm listening to the PowerPoint and look at them at the same time.
Officers will be more than willing to go through any of the points that you want to raise with regards to the data presented.
Yeah, the data and the figures are in the reports. But when you start looking through them, it's just really difficult. The graphs aren't in there, so I'm happy to meet and go through any of the data figures that you wish. So the reason they increase is that we've been doing proactive home visits, and they're not necessarily reported in terms of risk. It might be low level damp or mold in properties or from leaks. So if anybody goes into our property, have a home visit and spots something, even if it's not a hazard, it will be reported to us and we will put it on the system. So that's why those numbers go up, because we've been increasing our home visits to check vulnerability and make sure we're supporting residents. And if we pick up anything, it gets raised. So that's why the figures have looked like they're slightly higher. So I've never managed to get it in my career to 100%. I wish I could, and I'm striving towards that. Sometimes we miss an appointment. Sometimes the repair runs over target. Sometimes we think it's a 4-day repair and it's an 8-day repair. What we don't do is we don't issue extensions of time for our jobs. If we've allocated 5 days, it takes 10 days. That's the figure. You know, we don't try and manage the numbers because we're audited constantly. So those figures there will be a mix of missed appointments, will be complicated repairs that ran on. We might be doing roofing, which we can't do if it's inclement weather, so we have to stop doing the works. So there's a whole mixed bag there. And my goal in life is to get that 9% up to 100 and then retire back in Ireland. So I'm working on it.
I do appreciate there's going to be slippages, but it'd be nice to know, and now you've explained why you've got slippages, why it isn't 100%, you know, that there's.
And some of it's a recall. Sometimes, you know, residents aren't happy with the quality of repair and we'll open it back up and go and do a post inspection. So if any of the disconnect is sitting in that 9%, and we're trying to narrow it down because obviously our complaint numbers will be in line with that 9%. And that's where our focus is at the moment.
I mean, the chart that I haven't got in here is you were talking about tenants, it appeared to be tenant satisfaction, but I don't, you put it up there and it was I think 64% of something. And I would like to have drilled down further into why the figures were and what they were. But since I don't have the figures in front of me, I can't drill.
So I apologize for that. They're the external TSM measurement figures. So they're anybody who had a repair in the last 12 months. They're not necessarily satisfaction with the actual repair. So our numbers would be slightly higher, but when we send out the surveys,
Figured, yes.
yeah. So when we send out the surveys in 23, 24, which was the basis of 22, 23, that's where the perception of the service was, which in fairness was probably in line with where the numbers were when in July 2023 when I arrived. If you can see there, the one at the bottom, the respectfulness in the home and the quality of repair has been the big, strongest KPI that we've had in the last 12 months. And if I get quality right and I get respectfulness right in the home, the perception of the service will come with that. So we've had a massive focus just been on respectful and making sure we do the works. These are lagging behind because these are the figures from the previous year, because that's what we assessed the last 12 months. But what is really, you know, heartening is that they are tracking along with our management figures. They are coming up. So we work on, you know, we always chase the negative. We look at what the dissatisfaction is and we try to focus on that.
Was it TPO3? That doesn't see 59%.
So again, so that's
the die site, and it's
so it's gone from 12, it's gone from 48 to 60, right? It would take the percentage to which is the previous year, and a lot of that was that when you break into it, and there is a PAC, it's historical. It took too long to do the repair, you know, that sort of narrative. But we've been working through that, and I'm expecting that to continue to trend upwards. And we're working with residents and TA groups to make sure that happens.
And when you say you're making these new service improvements, what exactly are you doing with the service improvements? You've talked about estate visits, but then that was always something that people were supposed to do, and officers were meant to go and do estate walkabouts. They were meant to do droppings. I mean, that's what they were supposed to do. What's new from?
Okay, so from my point of view, that stuff still happens with housing management. So we've specifically showed repairs just on repair days. We go on to estates where we see a high repair demand. We do MOT style surveys where we go in and survey people's homes. We're looking at the highest repair demand, also looking at the lowest repair demand. We've done stock condition surveys. We're up to about 72% of our stock has a decent home survey. We're also reprofiling out in line with the next 10 years of how we will deliver the decent homeworks. So all that's happening now in terms of services on the ground. We've got reported online where we have a different media connections to come into the council. We're looking at customer journey, doing a lot of work with the housing forum members and the FRAG group. Just look at customer journey, look at that disconnect, you know, try and deliver the service differently with residents. We're looking at weekend appointments for some homes for complicated repairs. So now it's stable, and it is stable. What I need to do is I need to tailor it to what the residents and the councillors are asking me for within reason. And that's what I mean by those service changes.
What about the feedback from the call centre or whatever it's called these days? Because that, as you may recall, was a disaster area, if I might say so.
So yeah, so we're doing a lot of work with the contact centre now, particularly around the customer journey on managing late repairs, contractors running late, making sure we have visibility of it. If there's missed appointments, rather than a resident ringing us in and having to complain about the missed appointment, we're doing a lot of work at the end of the day where we do a wrap up and we're calling the homes, you know, and we're offering, if appropriate, you know, the vouchers which are in the handbook for missed appointments up front, and then rebooking them in with the resident as well. We're also opening weekend appointments for missed appointments. So we're doing a lot of work around that customer voice, and obviously we'd like to do it all in one go, but stabilizing the service and stabilizing the contractors and getting, you know, better engagement is the first real part. And I think our management figures are there, and I think our resident satisfaction is tracked through in terms of those improvements. But what I need to do now is take those voices and change the service where I need to get us to the 70s, 80s in the following year.
Right, can I just see, Councillor James, would you like to ask some questions?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for very helpful and detailed presentation. And I probably don't have such good eyesight, so please excuse me if I've misread any numbers, but I was particularly interested in the data on the damp and mold. I think you said there are now presently just 291 cases, is that right? I was just interested to understand whether you've mapped the spread and whether there are any particular hotspots, and if so, what your plan is then in terms of tackling that.
Absolutely. So again, we've done the tracking of this for the last 15 months, and we were able to identify trends. Obviously, it's quite complicated. Someone's building fabric. Sometimes you've overcrowding issues. You've got different things to placate. Where we have repeat issues, which are, let's say, for example, overcrowding, what we're doing is we've introduced something called Tier 2 work. So Tier 1 work is you attend 3, placate and leave because it's a repair service. And then you try and deal with the building fabric issues through your major works contractors. What we've introduced is a Tier 2. So for that example where we can see that there might be issues with overcrowding, we'll put in what we call passive ventilation systems. So we'll put in different ventilation systems to get more air changes in there to prevent that piece of work. Again, if there's some, you know, deficiencies in building fabric or insulation issues, we'll do the cavity wall insulation or do internal wall lining to board that up, and we monitor it with the sensors. So we are looking at what we're effectively trying to do is make ourselves redundant and look at the repair demand. Because there's no point in us just going back after 6 months and 6 months and 6 months. We're just trying to do that. So we are in a very stable place, and I can provide that data as well to you, Councillor. And you can see the proactive works we've done off the back of what we found in the last 15 months, you know, and it is good. And is there a particular pattern, some archetype of stock we could talk about in terms of better ventilation? Because people, you know, dryers in homes, different things like that, you know, the buildings have changed. So we are trying to step change around that. Obviously, our major works team are installing windows and doing massive investment across the stock as well, which is targeting some of those issues, and then working with residents about better education and how they can, you know, do things in the home and how we can help them and what we can provide. So it's not as straightforward. It's A and B because it's quite complicated, but we do have patterns and we have mapped them out, and we are using, you know, the home visits and the investment plan to resolve that.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much for the report, and I think it may be useful to revisit the damp and mould data that you mentioned in another meeting, so that we can just keep looking at this and reviewing everything. I apologise Councillor Ume, you would like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to emphasise some of the points that have already been made, but particularly, obviously, the last time that a repairs update came to this committee was 2 years ago, as requested by the committee. And so, obviously, this report has been designed to give an update on the progress that's been made since that point. I think we're all across all the historical challenges that have been faced within the repair service, you know, many inherited from previous administration, but I think the point being that at the start of this journey of improvement that has involved getting in new leadership, of which you can see sitting opposite you through John Hayden and obviously in Richard Shway and the team who've come in, specifically when it's come to damp and mould, having this cross-departmental team who are focused and determined on how that can be addressed and whether that involves members of the environmental team, but also working with the NHS as well. And over that 2-year period, as was shown on the chart, you can see that the cases have been driven down by 95% and 1% of the housing stock have damp and mould cases, and they're all addressed within target timeframes. And it's really good to see the team already aligned to Awab's law, ensuring that all the cases are treated within that specific timeframe. So that when that does become law, I mean, in the 1st of October, when it comes into practice, the team's already across how to triage and treat all cases and provide follow-up inspections and listen to residents when it comes to damp and mould. I also just wanted to come back quickly, if I may, on the tenant satisfaction measures. And the data that's been presented. I also recognise the Chair is planning to bring a fuller paper. I believe that's on the forward plan to discuss that in more detail. The data's already on the Council's website, so just to give the committee that assurance that it is on the website, but there will be that opportunity to go into more detail with regards to the tenant satisfaction measures and understanding the TP01s and O2s and all the the rationale around that, but also the figures and the regulator of social housing's requirements when it comes to reporting of this data. So there will be that chance to scrutinise that at a future meeting.
Well, thank you very much. And I particularly like the every contact counts that you mentioned, that we're not just going in to look at one thing, that you're looking at the whole environment where you're there. And I think that's remarkable. Thank you. Move on to the next presentation. And this will be item agenda 4. Housing provision in Hammersmith and Fulham for people over the age of 55. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
I'm Richard Shway, Director of Housing. I'm presenting the report which you've received. I have got some slides to talk about it, to understand about the situation, but all the analysis is in the paper which was being provided to members. So I just thought to start off is about understanding about what we're trying to do on this paper, and it's about to understand the challenges of the housing provision for older people on a national, regional and a local level, in particular Hammersmith and Fulham. The picture you see is the chair of our sheltered housing, Marilyn Mackey, commonly known as Maddie, who has actually been helping us to understand about some of the issues which we face in Hammersmith and Fulham and how we can do things better. And I think Maddie has also been very good to challenge us in the housing officer leadership team about we need to do better in over 55 accommodation. So this paper is very much looking from the lens of herself and from other residents of over 55s, but also it looking at the housing provision and cost, and also officers have undertaken what we call the SWOT analysis, which is a strength, weakness, opportunities and threats. The purpose of the paper is to enable members to understand, ascertain what we can move things forwards, and maybe you can give us feedback on how we can actually do things better. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of information which we found from about on a national basis about research on housing for over 55s. Much like the rest of the population, they're affected by the housing crisis, which we've had, and also challenges of affordability. But I think some of the key highlight areas which the National Housing Federation have said have been in the area of private sector rental. Nearly half of the private sector rental tenants are aged 65 and over, are in the bottom 20% of household incomes. That is quite a ticking time bomb for us to look at. 2 in 5 older private rental sectors, which is roughly 42%, are struggling to meet the cost of either bills or essentials, or even both. Almost half, which is about 48%, of older private rentals worry about getting into debt due to their housing or other living costs being too high. And of those private sector rentals who are retired, around half, 49%, believe their quality of life in retirement is being significantly impacted by the housing costs. These are the challenges which are not just unique to older people, but does highlight the increasing pressures that are being placed on affordable housing. Looking from a regional context, we have been also looking at from the Mayor of London's towards the age-friendly evidence base. And what we've seen is that by 2050, it's projected there will be over 1 million more Londoners aged 60 years and older than in 2020. It's projected by 2050 that there'll be over 300,000 more Londoners aged over 80 years older than in 2020, and over a third, 36% of householders, headed by persons aged 45 to 49, renting privately in 2021, and that's up from a quarter, 26 of householders of this age in 2011. As you can see from the analysis which we've undertaken, the shortage of social housing in London has significantly raised the number of older Londoners renting in the private sector renters. This increase in middle-aged renters also mean older people miss the opportunity to buy. And also, I just would like to say that we've also seen a significant increase in private renting from 12% in 2011 to 18% of people aged 15 and over from Black, Asian and minority ethnic minorities are more likely now to be private renters. So what does that all mean in the local context for Hammersmith and Fulham? So what we've undertaken is published the Older People's Needs Assessment in 2024. That report has highlighted the population of Hammersmith and Fulham in 2023 was 193,202, and this is projected to increase to 2,189 by 2033. The 65% population is predicted to increase by 36%. And those aged 85 years and over living in the borough will increase by 48%. According to the 2021 census, 4% of the households were occupied by older people living alone in Hammersmith and Fulham, and that's the same as the London average of 4%. These figures highlight the acute challenges that we are facing locally, with increased populations of older people likely to be in the private rental sector and living alone. And this demonstrates why we are doing quite a lot more work in the private sector rental service. That's why we've got actually put in an implementation plan in the private sector service. And also we've got a strategy of actually looking at this area and how we can actually help our older people in that area. Now, looking at for housing provision and costs, the affordable housing dedicated to older people comprises about 1.8% of total homes within Hammersmith and Fulham. And the main providers of this housing are the sheltered housing, which is provided by us and Housing Service, Hammersmith and Fulham, housing association homes, almshouses, and Abbeyfield homes. The cost and eligibility of these properties differ, but there's an indicative price indicated below. So as you can see, the cheapest is the sheltered housing which the council undertake. We've also got then housing associations between 251 and 280. Private rental is nearly double the amount for one-bedroom homes, and private rental one-bedroom and shared homes is roughly 200 to 250. So what does that mean? And apologies, councillors, that the SWOT analysis is very small on the, but it is in your papers. But what I was wanting us to just look at is some of the strengths. So the strengths are that in Hammersmith and Fulham, we have 950 sheltered homes, letting on average 80 per year. The council, the housing associations, Arms House and Abbeyfield homes have a strong history of providing housing for this cohort of needs in the borough. We've also got segment of affordable council housing not impacted by loss of homes from right to buy. We've also got undertaken proper signposting which are accessible for available housing on the internet. And we've also now got a housing standards team that can enforce against rogue landlords. The council's family housing strategy also includes action to provide more opportunities for downsizing. One of the things about the strengths, we do have weaknesses, and weaknesses have been about the limited opportunities to access funding to build further sheltered housing. The perception of sheltered housing is similar to about care home provision. There is a difference, and we need to be thinking of sheltered housing, if you don't mind me saying, Chair, more as independent living, because I think the word sheltered has a different type of terminology to maybe what my generation is, which I would say I'm about 55. You know, the sheltered accommodation which we provide is more independent living now.
I think that's a big problem, isn't it? That people tend to think it's a nursing home or there will be GPs on site. So we do need to be really clear in the future that it's accordingly.
Yes, and I think one of the things what the government-sponsored Older People's Housing Task Force actually highlights, that, Chair, about promoting the term later living homes. That's what, or housing. Those are the things which we're looking to do and think about. But I think there's also, with this paper, there's quite a lot of opportunities. But before going about the opportunities, I just want to explain about some of the threats which we have in at the minute. One is about the continued lack of national priority of older people's housing issues, leading to a decline in choice and quality of housing for over 55s. The limited availability and sufficient capital funding to build new housing for the over 55s, and the long-term high cost, potentially unstable private rental presence is a risk for over 55s, and the high land values limited opportunities to build affordable housing for older people. But at the same time, I also think that as we in housing have stabled our ship as services, there is also a need for us to also look at what modern day standard of housing is aimed at meeting older people's needs. We also need to be looking at how we can actually ensure that we embed a new local plan, thinking about older people's needs. Rebranding, as I mentioned, about the council's old sheltered housing to offer something new and contemporary. Look at our current housing stock and consider whether there's full or partial redevelopment opportunities that will yield better quality sheltered housing. And also, there is also a need that we as a council housing service need to work a lot closer with housing associations to identify sites for redevelopment, possibly with other tenures to help with viability. Chair, I'm open to questions from the panel.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's quite frightening, isn't it, some of those statistics? And one thing that grabs me is that 55 doesn't seem that old anymore, does it? And we keep talking about over 55-year-olds when we've got people in London living to 100. So this situation is going to increase, isn't it, big time? Any questions?
Yes,
Councillor Alford.
As Mr. Shrey and other people know, and Councillor Ume knows, I'm absolutely interested in sheltered housing and have had a long involvement about it. I think that sheltered housing does now give the wrong term implication, but I think one has to be extremely careful and very conscious of how to, and I hate the word rebrand, but to rethink as to how it is, I hate to say sold as well, but how it is given to people. It is not given very well, I don't think. I think it's a failing over all areas of sheltered housing. because it does appear to some people, and forgive me for being crude, that it's somewhere older people are dumped. It should not be there. It should be somewhere that they should be keen to go to if they want to downsize, move into smaller properties. And we have to think on a broad way of how to make it an interesting and enjoyable prospect. I know that we do a lot of good work in our shelter schemes. There are some things that are bad, but one of them is the rebranding. It's also looking at the suitability of some of the sites. Now, I have over many years raised certain sites that I thought perhaps could be redeveloped in a different way, and suggested where we could have had opportunities. To date, it's fallen on totally stony ground. Nobody's been interested in my ideas, but I have had them for a long time. I'd be happy to share them with you, Councillor May, if you ever want me to. I'm sorry to go on, but it's coming to a question. What we used to do was, when we used to have this marvellous booklet, it was beautiful, of setting out all our sheltered schemes, including what I call the almshouses, Hammersmith United, all of them. It was a wonderful booklet. We no longer do it. Now, I know it's on the internet, but when you are making a life change, which it will be to move into sheltered, you want time to sit down. You want to be able to look at something and browse it. Not, well, I'll have a look on the internet. Yes, that gives you an idea, but that's something that people want to be able to sit and show and discuss with their families. And I think we should look at giving some way of doing that people can actually sit down, look at it, say, well, I think this scheme looks nice. Oh, I don't think I fancy that scheme. Or didn't Mrs. So-and-so live in? You know, that they actually can see, they can see what the amenities are. We used to do this. We used to have this marvellous booklet, which covered all the shelter housing in the borough of all denomination. You know, that people could, where it was, what it had. And it was much more successful, shall we say, marketing and getting people interested. So I would make that. The other point I would make and ask, what relationship are we having with housing associations? Because one of the problems I find is that when you have older residents of housing associations, a lot of them do have their own sheltered housing schemes. They make no match between people who are in their ordinary accommodation and wanting to go to a smaller accommodation. They're just not listened to. So that is an avenue of work I would suggest that perhaps could be considered. I'm sure I'll come up with a few more ideas, but those are some suggestions and questions for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Alford, for the feedback. I mean, I will just first of all start by saying, in terms of the redevelopment, I mean, in terms of some of the ideas that you may have had that fell on stony ground, no doubt that those ideas fell on stony ground potentially amongst your colleagues, because once you were sitting in this chair where I am now, and that would have been the perfect opportunity, no doubt, to make those transformations to the schemes. So yeah, no, I'll just continue because you've made quite a few points and some of them are really useful. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasise that opportunity perhaps was lost because of some internal colleague discussions that you had when your administration were leading the council. But moving on to, I suppose, the rebranding and look and feel, I mean, yes, there's more work that needs to be done. I think Rich has already spoken about some of the ideas that have been presented and work that can be done to change the name, the look and feel, to entice more individuals from all sorts of backgrounds to consider this accommodation in the council. No doubt a problem that other local authorities and other providers face as well, but absolutely we'll take that feedback on board. I think in addition to that, I just want to really emphasise the difference that the Sheltered Forum group make in terms of helping to really improve sheltered in every which way. And that's from the repairs elements and their feedback in terms of wanting to have local labourers from the direct labour organisation focused on their sites. And that's happened because of them. And there's been really positive feedback about that, to making sure that there are opportunities for individuals to mix and mingle. And they're very much a part of creating a really vibrant community. So I'm very thankful to every single representative who turns up very regularly to discuss ways to improve the offer. I think moving forward, their input into how that then evolves will be essential. I think in addition to that, finding ways to highlight the offer through perhaps their lived experience will be really useful too. I mean, I don't have the examples of the marketing materials, but I know that there is information obviously available on website, and there is always an appetite to produce yet another leaflet, no doubt, from the housing service. So that's useful feedback. With regards to housing associations, I mean, maybe I didn't understand the point, but I know that there is that partnership working in terms of placements within schemes, but maybe that's not the point that was being made, and maybe Richard or even another officer may want to comment on that specifically. But certainly I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of understanding all the different strengths and opportunities and using that to develop a new strategy moving forward. Richard, did you want to comment on the housing association or another point?
Oh, thank you, Councillor May. I suppose what I was just saying, I think you were saying, Councillor Alford, is that we need to do a lot more working with the housing associations in this area of work. And that's an area which I am going to pick up over the next 6 months to get them to understand about what they've got and how that actually works. And we work together a lot better.
I think that was, if I may sort of respond on to, and I'm afraid I am going to correct you, Councillor May, but forgive me for that. I hope you'll forgive my presumption. I'll go with Mr. Sway first. What I find is, you know, you go and visit people, and because I've been involved in sheltered, and I'm always recommending, they can't seem to, they would quite like to stay with their own landlords. So housing association, like Notting Hill does have sheltered. I know Shepherd's Bush isn't Shepherd's Bush any longer, but can we just stick to the old terms? They also have their own shelter schemes. Residents who've been part of one housing association would quite like to stick with their own housing association because they know how it works, but they get no help to move from what is regular housing association accommodation. They just sort of stonewall to move into the sheltered. That is a sort of rather strange problem. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you for the clarity. And I think, yes, then there needs to be conversations had with housing associations where that may be happening. Absolutely.
And I regret, Councillor May, it's usually I've been talking to directors of housing and showing them the sites under all administrations, including my own when it was there. And for many years, while we've had a Labour administration, I've tried with housing director, not Mr. Shway, I'm not, but previous housing directors say, have you thought? And I've got an absolute blank wall, so it isn't just mine. So
Okay.
I think you can appreciate this administration speaks and works with the residents who are present in the schemes, and obviously the opportunity perhaps was lost when you had the opportunity to do that. But
Okay, I
certainly,
think we'll leave
yeah.
that on there, but Councillor James, do you have some questions?
Yes, thank you
comment?
very much. Very interesting report, and obviously a very, very pressing issue. I'm just conscious actually of the various comments that have been made tonight about terminology and age. And actually it strikes me that the word that seems to be missing from this strategy is autonomy. And we see that in health, right, where there's a huge sort of focus on choice and autonomy. Now, obviously, it's going to be, you know, there is difficulty in constrained times with having absolute choice and autonomy, but I'm wondering whether there's any opportunity to build in a greater level of that language, and also thinking about ways to enable greater choice and autonomy through the strategy going forward.
I think that's a really good idea that we need to look at that. And I think Aaron and who's here with us today, who's our strategy officer, will look and see what we can actually do. I think the most important thing, it's about how what I don't want to do, if you don't mind me saying, councillors, is I don't want this strategy just to be put on a desk and nobody actually deals with it. It's really important for me, especially I'm 55 this year, that we need to make sure that we deliver on this, that we've got a crisis coming over the hill. We need to deal with it now and look at how we can actually all work together and think differently on how we can actually provide a better service provision.
Thank you very much. I was thinking maybe for the future, because this one won't go away, will it, with the statistics that we've been given, perhaps we could ask to look at some of the vacancy rates. And I'm quite conscious that we talk of age 55 and over, personally very conscious. Could we break that down perhaps? Because that doesn't tell me whether we've got 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds. And I think that would be quite useful in the future with planning, because as we were saying right in the beginning, it matters to people that it's not seen as a nursing home, it is independent living for an age group. Yeah.
Sorry,
Please do,
just a
Aaron.
brief point. There's some quite detailed analysis coming out of the local housing needs assessment process, so that will be informing the local plan. So that kind of detail will be there. If anything, far too much detail.
I
So-
think that will be very useful for future conversations and planning, won't it? Big difference between 55 and 95. Yeah. Much. So, does everybody, oh, Laura,
So-
Councillor James.
Sorry, just one more question, really. So obviously it's really helpful to see the spread of the different sort of options that are available that are specialists, but in terms of supporting people to remain in their own homes, what's the position there?
It's an area which we are working a lot more with the with colleagues in public health and also adult social care. One of the things what we've done from April this year is actually the service now looks after the aids and adaptations. In the past, what we've actually undertaken, which is not the right thing in my opinion, has been when we've had a unit to make it disabled needs, we've made it disabled needs, and instead of actually, we then should be looking at how we can actually think about other users who've got disabilities to come in to use it. We've then ripped everything out and start again. Now, since I've been here and with Councillor Ume's agreement, we do not do that. So that allows us to understand what we can actually do, and we can look at people's disabilities and also general needs as well, so we can actually think what we can actually do. Recently, that we've been talking to people about how can we actually help people to go from maybe a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom unit into a single-bedroom units in our sheltered or independent living accommodation and get them to see what we actually do in that. And I think it goes back to what Councillor Alford's mentioned. It's about making sure that it's about looking at this. I call it service marketing, the 7 Ps. You know, you've got your price, you've got your place, you've got your promotions. But it's about looking at the physical evidence and looking at the people. That's what will make those changes and make those people feel that they want to be part of this smaller but good community spirit. And it's bringing back, as I keep on, you know, one of the things which I took this job on, it's about going back to old school housing, I call it in the teams. I think some of them a bit sick of me talking about it, but it's about old school housing where we all work together, looking at the neighbourly side of it, looking at the community side of it, but also making sure that we actually as officers have that professional curiosity of looking at the resident at the heart of everything what we do and make things better for them. And that's what we on that journey of improvement to do. Hopefully that explains your question, Councillor Jones.
Thank you.
And you have another question?
I do, well, it's more raising a point, particularly as we've got onto adaptions. Now, you know, they come in all different shapes and sizes. Where there has been a weakness I found, and which I think you're starting to address, is it with the adaptions, that it takes a long time if somebody needs it. And it also, again, I hate to say it this way, but it's an incentive for people, if they wish to downsize, if we can sort of say, well, if you're going into accommodation and it is not a care home, and people get frightened and they think we're trying to send them off to a care home, which is the last place I'm trying to send anybody. I want people to be independent. It gives them for their pride, and it needs people to have their own well-being. So I'd make that very clear, and I think, been very supportive of the Sheltered Housing Forum. But we don't do adaptions as well as we could, and I particularly, shall we say, with the independent sector, when we're meant to work together, I have come across tremendous problems with people who are doing the adaptions, like the walk-in showers and the taps, completely not understanding and not realising that they have to be done, and maybe thinking that 2 years is fine for somebody to wait. Well, it's not. And I think we're getting much better at it in our own shelter stock. But if we're working as a sort of, I hate the word co-production, but whatever we want to call it, joined up thinking all together. We've got to be good on all that for our maturer population.
I totally agree, Councillor Alford. I think one of the things what we are looking now is whole life cycle costs. So that means that rather than actually looking into a particular project, we need to be thinking about the whole life cost of the project, but also about the resident and thinking what we can actually do to help help people. And we are starting to have that discussion internally and making those things. And I also feel, if you don't mind me saying, I think sometimes we put things in place which we think is right, but we don't actually listen to what the resident needs are. So we got to think it differently. So a prime example, if you don't mind me saying, last thing for me on this item is that where you can actually look at baths, people think, oh, well, we'll put a shower. Well, some people, you don't need to, but you can actually nowadays with plastic baths, you can actually make a opening, which is watertight, and people can use it for a bath and shower together. And those are things which we need to be thinking a bit more.
So
And
do
it's about-
you work really closely with occupational therapy? Yeah, so that all can be modernised.
Yes.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
literally about to
Work,
say that,
yeah.
exactly that. And it's using the experts and working with
Yeah.
the different teams in the right way. And not to mention the experts that are our residents, right? And our disabled residents forum. I
course.
promise I'm not trying to just shout out every single forum we have, but we do have a disabled residents
Yeah.
group that comes together to help influence and inform this particular piece of work.
Okay, thank you all very much. To note the contents of this report then. Everybody happy? Yeah. So you'll come back with all the data that we asked you for that you said will be coming out shortly. So we can.
That will be in the public domain, I think.
As I've already
late summer.
mentioned, I think this.
Chair, we will bring a report in 6 months' time to you
Yeah.
to show you what we've learned. But I also think it would be good that we can actually give you a overview of the programs, what we've been doing in
I think that would
sheltered
be
housing
really
as well.
useful, and to maybe know how much we've got, what the turnaround is,
Yeah.
what the waiting list is. That
Yeah,
would be really
we can
interesting.
do a full
And a
report,
bit more of
operation report.
The extremes of age groups.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Everybody happy now to note the contents of the report? You happy? Thank you very much. Councillor Alford, they said that they already were doing that, so I assume that that is already happening. Yeah, it's already happening. So that's what we were told. Thank you very much, Claire. And this is a report presentation on a homelessness update. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So Claire Dorning, Head of Service for Homelessness Prevention and Assessment. I have been here before at previous meetings to talk about homelessness. So this is very much an update and a summary of some of the priorities that we're working on this year. So just as a starting point, during last year, over 3,000 households approached the council as homeless. The main reasons for homelessness remain quite consistent, and they are family, friends, evictions, loss of private rented accommodation, and domestic abuse. Not everybody that approaches us for council as homeless gets placed into temporary accommodation. Of the 3,000 approaches last year, 547 were placed into temporary accommodation during the year. And that's a mix of both families and single households. And at the end, so 31st of March this year, we had 1,511 households in temporary accommodation, which was an increase on the previous year, but a 4% increase. So alongside all London boroughs and a lot of boroughs across the country, our own temporary accommodation budget was under significant pressure last year, and with an overspend of 6.4 million at the end of the year. We have an action plan in place to help us manage the ongoing budget pressures. And there are three main areas of work. And it's about the homelessness process as a whole. It's about the flow in. So when households first approach us, how can we prevent homelessness? How can we spend more time with households to help them resolve their housing issues? Then we have that period of time when households are in temporary accommodation, and a lot of the work that we do is to look at more cost-effective temporary accommodation to try and drive down the cost of the temporary accommodation that we're using. And then it's the flow out of temporary accommodation and increasing the opportunities for helping households move into settled accommodation. So if we move on to the next slide. Oh. Is it frozen? Okay. Well, what I was going to move on to just sort of talk about briefly. So working with households to prevent homelessness is a really important area of work for us. And some of the changes that we're putting in place this year is the way we work and the way we engage with our homeless households, you know, and our homelessness approaches. So we're changing the way we work to increase face-to-face contact. You know, for me, if you can talk to somebody, if you can meet with them face-to-face, that is by far the most effective way of working with households, and really kind of spending time to, you know, checking that they understand that that you're picking up the anxieties and concerns that often associate with, you know, with homelessness. It's an immensely stressful point in your life. And I think that spending time with somebody is by far the best service that we can offer. We're doing a lot of work to work in a more integrated way across our services. We've got the private sector standards service now within the housing department. We do a lot of work with private sector standards because a big proportion of our households are in the private rented sector. And so that's around, is there anything we can do to deal with, you know, to tackle landlord behaviours, conditions in the home, and we've had some really, you know, really good successes working with our private sector team to improve the homes that they're in, and to the point where it's actually suitable for a household to continue living in their private rented home. We also do a lot of work with adult social care and children's services, and that's around providing the support that people often need to help them manage the circumstances that they're facing, particularly if you've got mental health issues or physical, you know, health issues. And we're doing a lot of work directly with landlords to negotiate with them. And that's around, you know, is there anything we can do to keep, you know, to maintain this tenancy? What could we do? You know, what would make the difference for you to offer another 12 months, 2 year, 24-month assured short hold tenancy to prevent that family from having to move out and be disrupted? And we'd like to work proactively to, you know, where landlords come to us, and if for some reason a tenancy hasn't been successful, we will often negotiate to see if we can reuse that tenancy. Okay, so that family's moving out. Could we use it? Can we introduce you to another family to move in? And I think the other thing that we find really valuable is to build some confidence with private landlords, because if they understand that, you know, homeless households are actually just they are just ordinary households needing homes, then hopefully we can encourage them to let more properties to us. Because private rented sector is such an important supply, because we know that the supply of social housing is so limited. So it's really important that we do everything we can to make that supply work. Well, I think that was where I was going to, as much as I was going to say, but obviously I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'll ask the panel, Councillor James, would you like to ask any questions?
No, actually, I think your report's very clear. Thank you very much.
Well,
Councillor Alford.
Yes. I do have some questions as usual. First of all, I'm delighted to say that I hope you're improving with the silos, because as you know, I've had long conversations with both Councillor Ume and yourself about my concerns about silos, that people, when they are going through the process of temporary accommodation, have felt in the past that they were left in air because one doesn't pick up. I'm glad if you're making an improvement on that, because frankly, it needed to be. There are two questions really. You said 3,000 approach you, but you only take, is it 3,000 you said? How many of the house?
Yeah.
Yes, but you only take, sorry, I haven't got to get this computer, I have to run around with it. You only take so many, you took about 500, did you take from the three?
Yes, apologies, yeah. So 3,000 households approached us saying that they were at risk of homelessness, or they felt that they were at risk of homelessness. So we work with every single one of those households. So we have a duty to meet with them and assess their needs, and and look at their circumstances. But temporary accommodation is only provided to households who are actually going to be homeless, who are imminently homeless, and they're in priority need. So if you remember, that surrounds single people who may have some vulnerabilities with physical or mental health or age, and families with children, and people fleeing domestic violence. So that 500 number, the smaller number, was of those approaches, that it was the 500 were in priority need, requiring placements into temporary accommodation, but we work with the bigger number.
Presumably with the bigger number, they are also going after the same sort of private rented accommodation as you are looking for your people that are in priority need. So there is not a conflict, but there is a market forces that everybody's going for the same accommodation.
You're right. I mean, you're absolutely right, and so it is about how we work at both ends, and so we've had to be, so we spend a lot of time out in the market, engaging with landlords. In March, we had a private landlords forum, and with Ed Shaler, who's the Assistant Director of Private Sector Standards, and part of that was introducing ourselves, making sure private landlords know that we're a council that want to work with them and want to engage with them, and to encourage landlords to come to us. And we've had a good response from that. We have picked up in, introductions. So you're right, it is a pressure, but there's a lot that we can do to engage.
Richard Schwayham for a second.
Thank you, Chair. I think over the last couple of years, Councillor Alford and the panel, what we've also been doing is that we've been proactive. So we haven't just been waiting where everybody just comes knocking the door and says we're homeless. Claire and the team done a lot of work behind the scenes about being proactive, understanding, because that creates a lot of anxiety, that creates a lot of misunderstanding. And we've tried to educate people, and we've been educating officers that we can actually do things before the day when they told that they are homeless. And in some ways, we've also, Claire, I'm right to say, that we've also been able to work with those private landlords to understand what's been the issue. Has it been the issue that the private landlord needs more money and they didn't want to have that discussion? So, okay, so what can we actually do? We've been able to also look at different grants to help families, to help them to get the additional rent and things of that nature. And just recently, we've been also working with the government because of all the great work what we've been doing, to see where we can actually look at maybe get more funding off the government to tackle our homelessness, singles and families. So that's another aspect which is showing to the government that we are doing things better, because they're coming to us and asking us what we would like to see and deliver on the ground.
Thank you very much. And I suppose what concerns me is that we won't see the end of this, will we? Because the demand is outstretching the accommodation. And you said that sometimes you'll be able to work with a landlord and defer for a year. So I'm thinking, is that just putting it off for another year, the inevitable of where you started the year before? Or in that year, can you work with that family to provide a longer term solution?
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, the reason I say a year is because an assured short hold tenancy is 12 months, but quite often we don't start there. You know, we start at at 2 years, sort of 3 years, and and we get a good measure of success. But I think the other thing is it's about trust and confidence. And with a 12-month as a short hold tenancy, the landlord is, I think there's something around not feeling under pressure. That's a manageable period of time. But actually, mostly, if it's working well, then they just extend the tenancy anyway. So it's about, gauging and not creating fear or anxiety. And it's really about building trust and confidence. And we can do things, the conversations we'll have with landlords are to offset some of the what they might perceive to be financial risk. We can put some money up front. I always, if we're going to invest in securing private rented accommodation, it's always in the interest of the family. But we can provide rent in advance for a month, because if somebody's receiving benefits are paid in arrears. So you just take out that risk, that feeling of risk, and and try and understand the dynamics.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Alford.
Yes. What is the length, the normal length people are in temporary accommodation? And
That depends, Councillor Alford.
is it how long is a piece of string sometimes, roughly?
It can be. I mean, in some local authorities, it's a long time. You're talking, some people could be in 15 years, So
I'm just wondering if it, if for some.
That's for some local authorities. Ours is roughly could be about between 8 to 10. It depends. But I think that I always remember when I came in here, people using the word temporary accommodation when you're talking about 5 years or more than that. That's not temporary accommodation anymore. That's people's properties, and we are starting to address that internally, of explaining that we need to look after people in a better way.
I mean, I think perhaps the terminology needs to change, in that if, for instance, somebody for their priorities, I'm not being specific, that we know that we will hopefully be able to house them in either social housing, that they would be, for 2 years, they would be called temporary accommodation. But the other people who have a different set of priorities, we know we aren't going to be able to house them immediately. We perhaps should call it something different, so it's much clearer that it isn't a stopgap, it's actually a fairly long-term solution to where they'll be living.
It's something which I think Claire and I are exploring with the government ministries to look at what we can actually do that. And I think they're also looking at themselves to see the terminology changes. So I think you might
think
start
that's very,
seeing that happening.
Very sensible, isn't it? Because I mean, if you're a young person on a year contract for a home, that's temporary, isn't it? So we use the word temporary to mean different things depending on the age group and depending on where they're living. Thank you very much.
Just one final, you talk about,
Last point.
so the offer that some people that you are able under the new legislation to offer them into private sector and they get the one offer. What happens if that breaks down? Where do we start again with them being in temporary accommodation, or have they lost their options? What happens?
Get it right. It's, it's a bit like being on mute on Teams, isn't it? So where we've supported somebody in the private rented sector, if we have discharged duty, if that's been the main offer of accommodation, then if they lose the property through no fault, if the tenancy comes to an end through no fault of their own within 2 years, then they can reapply. There's something called a reapplication duty, but effectively, the person can reapproach as homeless because they won't be homeless through any fault of their own.
Thank you very much. So I presume like the other subjects this evening. Oh, sorry, Councillor Jane.
So, sorry, I did just have one question, which is what impact do you think the Renters Reform Act is going to have on this area?
Oh, well, I mean, interestingly, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, it's obviously quite wide reaching because a lot of the Rent Reform Act will relate to the private sector standards, and enforcement and controlling in the market. For us, it's around, it's a total new look and new view of households being served with notice. So what we will have a lot more responsibility to engage with landlords to validate their reasons for wanting tenants to move on, because they will only be able to allow to serve notice for specific reasons. And the devil will be in the detail of the legislation, because in terms of the checks and balances around, you want your property back because you want to sell it. You want your property back because you're going to move into it, or a family member's going to move into it. It will change the way we work and the way we engage with landlords.
I suppose presumably it will give you an opportunity to reduce the need for temporary accommodation. So something hopefully you're gearing up for, I'm sure.
And can I bring Richard in?
I think we will be able to do that. I also think that it will enable us to do a lot more enforcement action for rogue landlords. It will also show people that we care about in the private landlords industry, should we say. And also it will also allow, through the private sector rental service, which is now part of housing, we can actually go and help people, which in the past we haven't been able to do that. This will allow us to actually enable people so that they can come and speak to us, and we can actually do that one-stop shop approach and help people in need.
Just to add, I think it's essential. I'm sure committee will agree, it's absolutely essential for the security, for peace of mind, for millions of renters, and just creating a fairer, more secure and safer market.
Thank you, everyone. So I suppose we'll keep a close eye on the Rent Control Act and what impact that has, and hopefully that will be a positive step for everybody. And we'll maybe in the future be able to look at the impact this has had on landlords with some examples perhaps of the very best and the not so very best. Okay, so Councillor Ume, did you want to speak? No. Okay, does everybody agree and with this report that we've heard on homelessness this evening? Yes, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this PAC on housing and homelessness, and I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. Like to thank those that are brave enough to go online to look at us all, and mention that the next meeting will be on the 5th of November 2025, so fireworks night. Thank you very much, everybody.